The judge smirked as Lila Jackson, a black widow in a faded dress, stood alone in court. They mocked her, underestimated her. But she had a secret that would silence them all, a truth so explosive it'd turn their laughter into shock. What could she possibly know that they didn't? The courtroom buzzed with quiet disdain as Lila Jackson stepped forward. Her dress was simple, the hem frayed from years of wear, but her eyes burned with something unyielding. At 41, she carried the weight of loss, her husband gone, her son's future stolen by a ruthless company. She wasn't a lawyer, she didn't have a degree, but she had something they couldn't take, a mother's resolve. Judge Evelyn Brooks peered over her glasses, her lips twitching with faint amusement. "Ms. Jackson, representing yourself?" Her tone was dry, almost mocking. A ripple of chuckles came from the gallery. Ethan Carter, the slick corporate attorney across the aisle, didn't even bother to hide his grin. He adjusted his tie, leaning toward his assistant. "This'll be over in 10 minutes, he muttered. Lila heard it. She was meant to. She straightened her spine. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Another laugh from Ethan's side. Judge Brooks sighed, flipping through a file. "This is about your son's wrongful termination, correct? Against Horizon Industries?" Lila nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They fired him without cause, took his livelihood. Our home's next." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And you think you can argue this against Mr. Carter here? A man who's never lost a case?" Ethan smirked, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed like a king on his throne. Lila met the judge's gaze. "I don't think, Your Honor. I know." The room went still. The laughter faded. Something shifted, just a flicker, but it was there. Ethan stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. At 39, he was the golden boy of corporate law, sharp, ruthless, and untouchable. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "This is a simple matter. Horizon Industries followed protocol. Ms. Jackson's son breached his contract. Emotions don't change facts." He glanced at Lila, a pitying smile playing on his lips. "I feel for her. I do. But the law doesn't bend for tears." He sat, confident the case was already his. Judge Brooks nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. Lila stayed silent, her hands clutching a worn folder. She'd spent months awake, poring over papers, chasing leads, whispering prayers. They thought she was nothing, a grieving mother out of her depth. But she wasn't here to beg. She was here to fight. "Ms. Jackson," Judge Brooks said, impatience creeping into her voice. "Your opening statement?" Lila took a breath, stepping forward. "Your Honor, Horizon says they follow the law. But what if I told you they broke it? What if I told you they've been lying? To you, to me, to everyone?" Ethan's smile faltered. Just for a second. "Lying?" Judge Brooks leaned forward, skepticism etched in her weathered face. Lila nodded. "Yes, ma'am, and I can prove it." A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan let out a sharp laugh, but it sounded forced. "Prove it?" he scoffed. "This should be entertaining." Lila ignored him. She opened her folder, her voice rising. "I've spent every night for 6 months digging through their lies, and I found something they didn't want me to see." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Something?" Lila met her stare. "Fraud, Your Honor, and it's just the beginning." The air thickened. Ethan shifted in his seat. The gallery hushed. They'd laughed at her, dismissed her. But now they weren't so sure. Lila Jackson wasn't just a mother. She was a storm-building strength. And the courtroom had no idea what was coming. If Lila's fight has you hooked, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and ring the bell. Don't miss what's coming. Justice is just getting started. The courtroom felt smaller now, the air heavy with anticipation. Lila Jackson stood at the center, her worn folder open in her hands. Judge Evelyn Brooks watched her closely, arms crossed, her earlier amusement replaced by a flicker of curiosity. Ethan Carter, though still polished in his tailored suit, tapped his pen against the table, a subtle crack in his composure. Lila took a slow breath, her voice steady but laced with fire. Your Honor, Horizon Industries says my son Marcus breached his contract. They say he missed shifts, cost them money. But that's not true. She pulled out a stack of papers, handing them to the bailiff. These are his time cards. Every shift he worked signed by his supervisor. He was there every day. Judge Brooks skimmed the pages, her brow creasing. Mr. Carter, you're filing claims otherwise. Ethan stood quickly, his smile tight. Your Honor, those records are incomplete. We have digital logs showing absences. Lila didn't flinch. Digital logs? She turned to him, eyes sharp. The ones you edited? A gasp rippled through the gallery. Ethan's jaw clenched. That's a baseless accusation, he snapped. You have no proof. Lila tilted her head. Don't I? She pulled another document from her folder, a printout of an email chain. This is from your HR department, sent 2 days after Marcus was fired. It says, adjust the logs, make it clean. Sound familiar? The room erupted in murmurs. Judge Brooks banged her gavel once, silencing them. Ms. Jackson, how did you get this? Lila's voice softened, but it cut deeper for it. I called every coworker Marcus had. One of them forwarded it to me. Took me weeks to find her. She was scared of him. She pointed at Ethan. And what he'd do if she talked. Ethan laughed, but it was hollow. Your Honor, this is hearsay. She's spinning stories. Judge Brooks ignored him, turning to Lila. You're saying Horizon falsified records? Lila nodded. Yes, ma'am, and it's not just Marcus. I checked their filings. 5 other employees fired the same way, same lies. All black, all from my neighborhood. The weight of her words landed like a punch. The gallery shifted, whispers growing louder. Judge Brooks sat back, her face unreadable. Ethan stood again, his voice tighter. This is absurd. She's playing the race card to dodge the facts. Lila turned to him, her gaze unwavering. The facts? Like how you buried the real logs? Or how you thought I'd never find them? She handed up another paper, a screenshot of a deleted file recovery. A friend helped me pull this from their server. Took us 3 nights, no sleep. It's the original log. Marcus worked every shift. You lied to take his job and our home. Ethan's pen stopped tapping. His eyes darted to the judge. Your Honor, this is inadmissible. Enough! Judge Brooks cut in, her tone sharp. She studied the screenshot, then the email. Her fingers drummed the bench. Mr. Carter, do you have the original logs to counter this? Ethan hesitated. A beat too long. We'd need time to retrieve them. Lila smiled faintly. I've got time. The silence was deafening. The judge's eyes flicked between them, her skepticism now aimed at Ethan. He sat, running a hand through his hair. Lila pressed on. Your Honor, I'm not done. There's more. Something bigger. Ethan's head snapped up. More? Judge Brooks raised an eyebrow. Go on, Ms. Jackson. Lila's voice grew quieter, but it carried a mother's fury. They didn't just fire Marcus. They targeted him. And I know why. It's in their own words, caught on paper they thought I'd never see. She paused, letting the tension build. But I'm not the only one who knows. Someone else saw it happen, and she's here. The gallery buzzed. Ethan's face paled. Judge Brooks leaned forward, her voice firm. "You're calling a witness?" Lila nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Marissa Hayes. She notarized their contract changes, and she'll tell you what they made her do." Ethan shot up. "Objection. This witness wasn't disclosed." "Overruled," Judge Brooks said, her tone final. "I want to hear this." Ethan sat, his hands clenching the table. The door creaked open, and Marissa Hayes stepped in, nervous, clutching her purse. Lila gave her a small nod, a silent "thank you." The room held its breath. Whatever came next, it wouldn't just break the case. It'd break Ethan Carter's world. The courtroom froze as Marissa Hayes took the stand, her hands trembling around her purse. Lila Jackson stood tall, her eyes locked on the woman she'd tracked down after months of dead ends. Judge Evelyn Brooks adjusted her glasses, her voice cutting through the silence. "State your name and occupation for the record." Marissa swallowed hard. "Marissa Hayes. I'm a notary public." Her voice shook, but Lila's steady gaze seemed to anchor her. Ethan Carter gripped the edge of his table, his earlier swagger gone. Lila stepped forward, her tone gentle but firm. "Ms. Hayes, did you notarize contract changes for Horizon Industries last year?" Marissa nodded, glancing nervously at Ethan. "Yes." Lila pressed on. "Were you there when my son's supervisor signed those changes? The ones that rewrote his hours, made it look like he failed?" A long pause. Marissa's eyes dropped. "No," she whispered. A murmur swept the gallery. Judge Brooks leaned in. "Speak up, Ms. Hayes." "No," Marissa repeated louder. "I wasn't there." The room buzzed. Lila's voice softened, pulling the truth out like a thread. "Then how did it get your stamp?" Marissa's hands shook. "They brought me the papers. A man from Horizon, tall, suit, cold eyes. He said it was already signed. Said I just needed to stamp it. I didn't ask questions." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Ethan shot up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay. She can't prove who—" Judge Brooks silenced him with a look. "Overruled. Sit down, Mr. Carter." Ethan sank back, his face tight. Lila kept going. "Ms. Hayes, did they tell you why?" Marissa's voice broke. They said it was to clean up loose ends. That Marcus was trouble, too loud, too black." The word hit like a thunderclap. The gallery erupted. Anger, shock, whispers. Judge Brooks banged her gavel, but her eyes stayed on Marissa. "You're saying they targeted him because of his race?" Marissa nodded, tears spilling. "Yes, and I stamped it. I didn't know he'd lose everything. I'm so sorry." She looked at Lila, pleading. Lila's eyes softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "Your Honor," Lila said, turning to the judge, "this isn't just about Marcus. It's about a company that thinks it can erase people like us, black, poor, loud, and get away with it. They forged records, bullied her into silence, and thought I'd stay quiet too, but I didn't. And now you know." Judge Brooks sat back, her face a storm of emotions. Ethan stood, desperation creeping in. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. The contract stands." "Does it?" Lila cut in, handing up one last paper. "This is their internal memo. Found it in a shred bin, pieced it back together myself. Says, terminate agitators, starting with Jackson. Dated the day Marcus spoke up about unfair pay." The judge took the memo, her jaw tightening as she read. The room held its breath. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "Mr. Carter," Judge Brooks said, her voice low and final, "explain this." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. I'd need to consult." "No," she snapped. "You've had time." She tapped her gavel, the sound echoing. "The court rules in favor of Miss Jackson. Horizon Industries' termination of Marcus Jackson is void. Reinstatement and damages to follow. A cheer broke from the gallery. Lila exhaled, her shoulders slumping as the weight lifted. Ethan stared ahead, hollow, defeated. Lila stepped outside, the evening sun warm on her face. Marcus ran to her, pulling her into a hug. "You did it, Mom," he whispered. She smiled, tears brimming. "We did it." Judge Brooks emerged behind them, pausing. "Miss Jackson," she called. Lila turned. "You ever think about law school?" Lila chuckled softly. "Maybe someday." Brooks nodded, a rare smile breaking through. "You'd be hell on wheels." She walked off, leaving Lila with Marcus, the air alive with possibility. She'd fought. She'd won. Not just for her son, but for every voice they'd tried to silence. The lesson wasn't the win, it was the stand. Lila Jackson, underestimated, overlooked, had spoken, and the echo would never fade. The sun dipped low over the city, painting the courthouse steps in gold. Lila Jackson stood there, Marcus at her side, his arms slung around her shoulders. The crowd from the gallery lingered, some clapping, others wiping tears. A woman approached, older, gray, streaking her hair, her voice trembling. "You saved my boy, too," she said. "They fired him last year. Same lies." Lila took her hand, squeezing it. "We'll get him back, together." Marcus grinned, his eyes bright. "You're a legend, Mom." Lila laughed, the sound raw and free. "I'm just a mom who didn't give up." But it was more than that. She'd walked into a room that saw her as nothing. A black woman in a faded dress, no title, no power, and turned it upside down. She'd given them a voice, all of them. Across the street, Ethan Carter stood by his car, briefcase dangling from his hand. His tie was loose, his face drawn. A colleague clapped his shoulder, muttering something about next time, but Ethan didn't respond. He'd lost more than a case. He'd lost the illusion of invincibility. Lila caught his eye for a moment. She didn't gloat, didn't need to. The truth had done the work. Back at home, Lila sat at her kitchen table, the same one where she'd spent sleepless nights with papers and coffee. Marcus slid a plate of food in front of her, mac and cheese, his specialty. "You gotta eat now, Mom. No more fighting on empty." She smiled, taking a bite. "Tastes like victory," she said. He laughed, but his face softened. "I'm proud of you. Dad would be too." Her chest tightened. She saw her late husband in Marcus's eyes, his strength, his fire. "He's why I fought," she whispered. "You both are." The room went quiet, the weight of their journey settling in. It wasn't just about a job or a house. It was about proving they couldn't be erased. Not by Horizon, not by anyone. The next morning, Lila found a note slipped under her door. Scrawled in sharp handwriting, "You've got a gift, don't waste it. E. Brooks." She chuckled, picturing Judge Evelyn Brooks scribbling it late at night. Law school. The idea lingered, teasing her. She'd never dreamed of it before. Too busy surviving. But now, maybe. Word spread fast. Neighbors knocked, asking for help. They took my lease. They cut my hours. Lila listened, her folder growing thick again. She wasn't a lawyer, not yet, but she was something better. A fighter who'd learned how to win. Marcus joined her, mapping out names, dates, patterns. "We're a team now," he said. She nodded. "Always were." That evening, Lila stepped onto her porch, the air cool against her skin. The street hummed with life, kids playing, music drifting from open windows. She closed her eyes, letting it sink in. She'd faced the giant and walked away standing, not unscathed. Her hands still shook sometimes. Her dreams still replayed Ethan's sneer, but stronger. A young girl ran up, braids bouncing. "Miss Lila, you famous now?" Lila crouched, smiling. "Nah, just loud." The girl giggled. "Mama says you're a hero." Lila's throat tightened. "Tell your mama heroes are just folks who keep going." The girl nodded, darting off, her laughter echoing down the block. Lila straightened, looking out at her world. She'd won a battle, but the war wasn't over. Horizon wouldn't stop. Others like Ethan would rise, but so would she. And next time, she wouldn't be alone. The underestimated had a voice now, hers, and it would keep ringing, calling others to stand, to fight, to win. Her story wasn't the end. It was the spark. And as the stars lit the sky, Lila Jackson knew the echo she'd started would never fade. The days blurred into weeks, but Lila Jackson's porch never stayed quiet. A line formed, mothers with eviction notices, fathers with pink slips, kids clutching crumpled letters. They came with stories that mirrored hers, systems built to break them, lies dressed as law. Lila sat with each one, her kitchen table now a war room, papers stacked high. Marcus brewed coffee, his voice steady as he read aloud. "This one's from Mrs. Tate. Says Horizon cut her hours after she complained." Lila nodded, scribbling notes. Same pattern. They don't just fire, they punish. Her hands moved fast, fueled by a fire she hadn't known she had. She wasn't just saving Marcus anymore. She was saving them all. One evening, a man lingered after the others left. Tall, gray at the temples, his coat patched. "Name's Henry," he said. "Used to work at Horizon. Saw what they did to your boy." Lila's pen paused. "Saw what?" Henry shifted, uneasy. Meetings, late ones. They'd pick names. Folks who spoke up said they'd teach him a lesson. Marcus was first on the list. Her stomach twisted. "Why didn't you say something?" Henry's eyes dropped. "Scared. Lost my job anyway." He slid a USB drive across the table. "Recordings. Took 'em before I left. Thought you'd know what to do." Lila stared at it, her heart racing. Proof. More than she'd dreamed. "Thank you," she whispered. Henry nodded, vanishing into the night. The next morning, Lila sat with Marcus and a neighbor, Tanya, a paralegal, who'd offered help. They played the files, grainy voices plotting, laughing, naming Marcus like he was a game. Tanya's jaw dropped. This could take Horizon down, not just a case, a whole damn lawsuit. Lila's eyes gleamed. Then let's do it. Word hit the streets like wildfire. A crowd gathered outside Lila's house, dozens, then hundreds. Signs bobbed, "Justice for Marcus. End Horizon's lies." A news van rolled up, a reporter shoving a mic in Lila's face. "Ms. Jackson, they're calling you a hero." "What's next?" Lila blinked, then smiled. "Next, we keep fighting. This isn't just my win, it's ours." The camera caught her. Tired eyes, steady voice, a woman who'd turned pain into power. That night, the story aired. Phones rang, lawyers offered pro bono help. Judge Evelyn Brooks watched from her office, a faint smirk tugging her lips. "Hell on wheels," she muttered, dialing a friend at a law school. "Got someone you need to meet." Lila didn't see the broadcast. She was back at her table, Marcus at her side, plotting the next move. The USB drive sat between them, a ticking bomb. "You think we can win this, Mom?" he asked. She looked at him, her son, her reason. "We already did once. Now we make it stick." Weeks later, Lila stood before a bigger crowd, City Hall steps, megaphone in hand. "They thought we'd stay quiet," she shouted. "Thought we'd break. But we're here, we're loud, and we're not done." Cheers roared, fists raised. She wasn't alone anymore. The spark she'd lit had caught, blazing through a community ready to rise. At home, Lila hung a photo. Her, Marcus, her husband's smile, frozen in time. She touched it, whispering, "We're still fighting, love." The echo of her voice wasn't just hers now, it was theirs. Every soul she'd lifted, every life she'd changed. She'd been underestimated once. Never again. The fight wasn't over. Horizon loomed, wounded but alive. But Lila Jackson, she was a force, a mother, a warrior, a name they'd never forget. And as the city pulsed around her, she knew the fire she'd started would burn until justice wasn't just a word, but a promise kept. If Lila's fight moved you, hit subscribe. The real battle for justice never ends, and neither do the stories.